I've always dreamt about this moment, Brandon. When I actually was being trained as a neurologist, I always dreamt about us having more opportunity to peek into the brain.
Spyros, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I've been so looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Brandon. It's a pleasure to join your podcast and provide an overview of Neuphoria.
Yeah, of course. So I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself in just a minute. But for the audience, Spyros has had a incredible career across R&D and development in neurology and psychiatry, across large pharma and also biotech. But Spyros, maybe give me an overview quickly of your career and how you came to lead Neuphoria.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm a neurologist and a neuroscientist by training. I trained in primarily neurodegenerative diseases, but very early in my career, I found psychiatric symptoms fascinating. And I was attracted to the neuropsychiatric symptoms of neurodegenerative diseases. I was a practicing neurologist and an academic neurologist at the University of Miami. But then, right around 2007, I realized that my personal purpose was better served developing medications for a lot of people rather than caring for patients one by one. It's the same purpose: treating patients, providing treatment solutions, and improving patient lives, but at a different scale. So I joined Biogen back then. And after Biogen, I spent about a decade in large organizations like Pfizer and Allergan working on CNS disorders altogether. I've worked both equally in psychiatry and neurology, in rare conditions and in more prevalent conditions over the years. And right about 2017, I realized that I also have an entrepreneurial spirit in me, and I decided to jump into company creation, early company growth, and company transformation. Fast forward about 2 years ago, I crossed paths with what was then Bionomics Therapeutics, and the transformation for this company and the opportunity was tremendous. So I was tasked to bring this company over to the States. Bionomics has been a biotech company that was formed in Australia, a very good pipeline, robust plans to bring medications to patients, but it was missing the investors that support the U.S. biotech ecosystem. So the effort just finished. We launched Neuphoria back in December after 2 years of very hard work, while advancing, of course, the Bionomics' pipeline. And now we're a US-based company with very much the same focus and same passion about neuropsychiatric diseases, particularly stress and anxiety disorders. We also work in the area of Alzheimer's disease. We have a program in partnership with Merck. Merck is responsible for developing the Alzheimer's disease program. They're currently in phase 2. So that's how I came about. I was fascinated by the opportunities that this company's transformation could provide to patients, and the potential for BNC210, which is the lead program for Neuphoria.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've seen the insides of a few different development organizations at this point. What really captured you about Bionomics?
Nimbleness and opportunity for scale, opportunity to do things fast and efficient, the right amount of governance, and of course, the most important for me, very robust science. I'm attracted by programs, I'm attracted by science. So when I did my own diligence on the BNC210 program, the past data sets and the potential, I immediately thought that this is something that could reach the market. This is something that could impact in a meaningful way millions of patients' lives. So that was my driver here to join the company, and that's the potential that I saw. We're a very small company. Again, we have an opportunity to move fast, execute with excellence, and bypass the unnecessary bureaucracy
Sure.
that comes with large organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell me a little bit more about BNC 210. What was it about it that really sparked your interest here?
So yeah, BNC 210 is a small molecule. It is what we call an alpha 7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor negative allosteric modulator. I know it's a mouthful, but I just want to start very high level. Basically, it's an allosteric modulator of a channel of a receptor that is intimately implicated in processing of anxiety disorders, mood, or anxiety levels, mood, and cognition. So it's expressed in areas of the brain that actually control emotional processing, like the amygdala, which is the most important emotional processing center in our brain, and it's conserved. It exists in all mammals, but also is expressed in areas like the prefrontal cortex and areas that control cognition. So it's a novel mechanism of action. It's not one of the established mechanism of actions that are targeted with current therapeutics.
Well, and how do you think about it in terms of the broader landscape of assets that are being kind of pursued in this category?
Yeah, so this is a very important question. In the space of social anxiety disorder and PTSD, that's the space that we're focused.
Right.
There is very limited competition. And I just want to take a moment just to talk about numbers here, because numbers are very important when we talk about competition. Just the numbers are vast. At any time point, there are about 18 million, based on valid epidemiological data that have been published and are cited by NIH websites, etc. These are not numbers that Neuphoria came up with. These are established, valid numbers. 18 million patients. 18 million patients suffer from social anxiety disorder at any time point. And for PTSD, the numbers are also staggering. There are about 10 million patients at any time point for both social anxiety disorder and PTSD. The last category of drugs approved was approved 25 years ago. And this is a category that is well established. SSRIs, they're antidepressants. They were approved for and developed for depression, and they were also positioned for other disorders such as stress, anxiety disorders. And they're used, but they do not provide, the ultimate coverage for this patient. So there's a lot of unmet need just in the instance of PTSD. And that's very well. These are very well established numbers. There are only 20 to 30% of patients with PTSD that reach remission in their symptoms using SSRIs. Now, the situation in social anxiety disorder is even more intriguing, considering the demographic. It's a condition that affects young individuals, adolescents, and young adults. The only thing that is approved is SSRIs. Again, the remission rates are very low. So there's very little about, for these patients in terms of treatment modalities. Patients that are in their prime, adolescents and young adults, and we're not talking about the regular jitters, okay? We're not talking the jitters that you get when you go on a date or when you go and deliver a speech in front of an audience, or you play tennis in front of a competitive, in front of an audience. We're talking about a very profound fear of judgment that causes paralyzing anxiety and affects your quality of life. So these patients don't want to engage in anything. They'd rather isolate. And this is what they do. They isolate, they miss school, they miss work, they miss the warmth of their family, they miss the social interactions. These people want to have social interactions, but they're so profoundly affected by this fear of being judged that they're paralyzed. So this is, describes social anxiety disorder. And what do these patients do? They actually isolate. They avoid. Okay. Social anxiety disorder is the number one cause of social isolation in young individuals. And it's creating all sorts of issues. If left untreated, it causes a variety of additional psychiatric symptoms down the road: depression, addiction, etc. If left untreated, suicidality increase. So it's imperative that these patients have treatment options available to them. So what is available to them? Okay, let's say, okay, so we have a patient with social anxiety disorder. They isolate, but they want to do something more. What do they do? Unfortunately, there is a lot of self treatment. They resort to alcohol. Okay, they resort to cannabis use. So that's the first line. So first line is isolation. Second line is, what can I do? I can seek psychotherapy. That's one, or I can self-medicate. And typically there is a little bit of both. The next is seek medical attention. So people do not seek medical attention typically until there's a real impact on their lives. So they reach the doctor's office and they're put on, most probably they're going to be put on an SSRI. And only about a fourth of these patients are going to respond to an SSRI. So there's a need for further coverage. SSRIs actually are chronic treatments. They don't act to reduce your anxiety levels imminently. You have to wait for 3-4 weeks. And in this patient demographic, there's a box warning for SSRIs for your audience that is very important. They actually increase suicidal ideations in younger individuals. So imagine being a young individual with anxiety. You've exhausted, you're isolated. You've probably tried to self-medicate. You're seeking psychotherapy. You have your pharmacotherapy that is chronic and it doesn't work well. And it might make your suicidality thoughts, if you have any, if you're experiencing, worse. What are your options? Very limited. So if you try all of these, typically you're prescribed a benzodiazepine, something like Valium or Xanax and that's not approved. But for the acute or as needed reduction of anxiety, this is kind of the last resort. And guess what? Benzos work. They really work. They reduce your anxiety levels. But there are downsides to benzos. Very well known. Benzos are typically prescribed also as sleep inducers. So they reduce your anxiety by affecting your GABAergic system, and they actually put you to sleep. That's how they do. That's how they work. They reduce the activation of your CNS. They put you to sleep. So not optimal. You have anxiety, and there's more. Okay, they make you drowsy. You cannot drive. Okay, you cannot go out and do your normal activities uninterrupted. You're foggy, so you cannot take a benzo and play competitive sports. You cannot take a benzo and go take an exam. Well, you could, but you're probably not going to do as well as you could have done without the benzo. And there's tons of data supporting all this. This is very well described. So here comes BNC210. Okay, here comes BNC210. So what we're developing is a medication that can reduce the anxiety levels, and that's experimental phase. So we have phase 1, phase 2 data. We're currently in phase 3. Can reduce the levels of anxiety as much as a benzo, but it doesn't make you drowsy, foggy, and there is no addiction potential. That's the major downside with benzos. Okay, and so far we've looked at this profile and we've asked psychiatrists to give us an opinion, and we built a market assessment of the opportunity, and this is huge. This is considered in terms of unmet need. This is considered the holy grail. So, what are we looking for for social anxiety disorder that is not approved? Something that acts fast. This acts as fast as 60 minutes. It lasts for 5 hours because that's a half-life of BNC210. It doesn't make you sleepy. It doesn't make you drowsy. And so far, there's no evidence of addiction potential. So this is and if you think about the social interactions, you can plan around your social interactions. You know when you're going to go out and have an interaction. You can take it, and within 60 minutes, so far, our clinical data show us that there is a sizable reduction in anxiety levels as reported by patients. Okay, and this also almost mimics the anxiety reduction that you get with a benzodiazepine.
Yeah, fascinating. What do you? Let me ask this a different way. There's a lot of talk lately in psychiatry circles around separation from placebo, and I imagine that this is top of mind for you, especially in a phase 3. I'm curious how you're thinking about that.
Absolutely. Whenever you work in indication, the first thing is separation from placebo. Just want to make a note here for your audience, which is very, very important. In actual clinical practice, we love placebo because whatever we do is added. So whatever we give, there's an additive effect of an expectation for a therapeutic benefit to patients. I just want to highlight, a lot of people see placebo as the enemy. No, placebo is actually not an enemy. Placebo is a friend. So there are two things. There are two things about the placebo effect. Okay, so at times we try to, develop medications. Okay, that produce marginal benefit. Like one of my mentors, early mentors, told me, Spyros, don't worry. If you're working on a good drug, the good drug is going to reveal itself. So, separating from placebo shouldn't be that hard of a task when you're working with treatments that are associated with substantial and significant benefit. Rule number one. So when you're not just trying to separate minor changes, then the placebo effect should not be an issue. But what if you're working on something that is adjunctive? It's still useful. It's still a powerful treatment. It can provide benefit, but the treatment effects are not so profound, and the placebo effect might create the noise and avoid the separation. That's where the art comes in. And every company has experienced people that manage and make sure that there is no placebo effect. And there are two elements of the placebo effect. Okay, there's the element of the placebo effect as felt by the patient. Okay, so the patient's expectations of getting better. And there is the bias introduced by the raters, the physicians that are rating the patients. Okay, so you have to have strategies in order to ensure that you're not cultivating an expectation to patients. Don't over promise. You don't advertise. You train your patients appropriately so that this is an experimental drug and you might not be realizing any benefit. But you also have to train your sites, your investigators, to make sure that the process is, how they approach the patient, how they treat their patient. Your patient is appropriate, and expectations are not cultivated in terms of outcomes. The second thing for the placebo effect is focusing on the investigators themselves. Okay, focusing on the quality of the investigator, on the training of the raters, and then there are some even more sophisticated ways that you can utilize in terms of the actual clinical trial design to filter out the potential for placebo effect. All these methodologies have a valid scientific foundation, but at times, have proven problematic. So one way is to have a period of time where you're just administering placebo and you're just excluding patients that are placebo responders. So that's kind of like a very traditional way of managing the placebo effect. This works in some occasions. In some occasions, it doesn't. And there's some more sophisticated methodologies, both for psychiatry and neurology, to filter out placebo effect. So, placebo effect is. I just want to recap for our audience. We love placebo effect in clinical practice. It's a friend. The placebo effect is real. It's biologically driven. There's a way that humans respond emotionally and physically to the expectation of getting better. It's part of our nature. And in clinical trials, there is the placebo effect is related with kind of the power of a drug, okay, how much treatment benefit it can introduce. And you can control it by educating your patient not to expect improvement necessarily, but also training your investigators and applying methodologies to reduce placebo effect in clinical trials. So a very complex question, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to elaborate on.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, expectation bias, certainly so hard to disaggregate, especially in a world where you only really have subjective scores to go on, as is true in most of psychiatry, right? Now, I've had Sean Singh over from Vistagen on the show, and he expressed some of the particular challenges, let's say, with working with the population in social anxiety disorder. I'm curious, how do you think about this specific population and the kind of accommodations required to design, a great trial and compelling research in SAD?
It is so. The trials in SAD very much depend on our ability to execute on a task that mimics a social interaction that is causing anxiety to patients. So it is an artificial methodology, very well accepted, very well studied. So we try to ask patients to talk in front of a trained audience in the confines of a clinical site, in the doctor's office. So we bring them in, consent them, screen them, and then we ask them to sit in front, to sit in front of an audience, and rate their anxiety levels over a period of 5 minutes. It's actually a period of 2 minutes. We call it the anticipatory anxiety. So we ask them to prepare a speech, and we ask them, okay, how anxious are you now that you're preparing the speech? And then so it is quite taxing what we're asking these patients to do. And these are patients that are, they are suffering from social anxiety disorder. So as you can imagine, this is a complex endeavor. It's an experiment that has many moving parts and a lot of nuanced pieces. So, programs that are, and by the way, the FDA actually likes it. Okay. And I've talked to the FDA on more than one occasions on this, and they consider it a very valid proxy to, an actual social anxiety event. Okay. And it's as close as you can get. Okay. I mean, if you want to go a step further, it's mostly a performance anxiety, but performance anxiety is a key component of social anxiety. Okay. It's not the end all be all, because social anxiety has this anticipatory anxiety. So most like patients feel anxious because of the anticipatory anxiety mostly, and that's what triggers to avoidance isolations rather than the tasks themselves, because ultimately they will isolate, do nothing, or do very little. So, there are two types of approaches. You have to be able to manage the anticipatory anxiety and have patients do what they need to do, get them out of their shell and back into the society. And if you don't manage anticipatory anxiety, that becomes problematic. And the second step is to decrease their anxiety levels while they're out there performing, giving a speech, playing a sport, attending a family dinner, etc., etc. So there are two components in social anxiety disorder. So the most important element for all companies, us, Vistagen, everyone that is working in social anxiety disorder, using an acute treatment paradigm, because there are other treatment paradigms that are not based on the public speaking task that we're asking the patients to perform, is consistency. Consistency training and evaluation of the sites on their performance, and training and retraining, controlling variance, and it's that the kind of the fine print in the site manual, and the training that you provide, and the consistency and the monitoring that you apply to sites, that is somewhat the secret sauce for success in social anxiety disorders.
Yeah, when I think about the like the operational challenge ahead of running a very kind of consistent study in social anxiety disorders, with all the kind of setup you've just described, it does sound like an operationally complicated behemoth to kind of manage.
It is conceptually. I mean, I don't want to pass the
Please.
wrong message to the audience, but it's not more complicated than imaging, like a complex biomarker study, or
Fair.
or an imaging modality that has to be applied across sites with the same type of sequences or procedures and process. It's just another process, another procedure, but it's the consistency, the training, the monitoring. Ultimately, it's not that difficult. I must admit, ultimately, it's not that difficult, but it's the know-how that I'm pretty sure all the companies that work in the space have developed that makes it eventually a lot easier and makes it almost routine. So as the field evolves, and if we're fortunate enough to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 medications for acute treatment of social anxiety, as needed treatment of social anxiety disorder, this will become part of our toolbox.
Sure.
And it's not going to be that hard. It's not going to be considered that hard any longer.
Yeah, sure. Certainly, I'm sure you all benefit from each other's work, kind of training and reinforcing.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful to Vistagen and the hard work that I've been doing all these years, and I'm grateful to Bionomics and now Neuphoria that are taking on the task of addressing this huge unmet need. This is a huge, very prevalent indications. I hope that more companies are going to become interested in this space. Migraine has 20, 25, 30 drugs, and it's a third or like half or a third of the prevalence of social anxiety disorder. So there's room. There is room for a lot of innovation here. A lot of innovation. So I mean, my message is don't necessarily be fearful or question, the complexity of the program. Yes, it is complex, not more complex than any other clinical trial.
Certainly. I'd love to maybe change gears a little bit here. So you've painted a really compelling vision for why social anxiety disorder has such an unmet need and is so imperative to resolve. And, certainly you've had other guests on the show kind of talk to a similar vision. How do you think about the next indication? Why PTSD as opposed to generalized anxiety disorder, for example?
Yeah. I mean, that's a very, very good point, Brandon. So actually, PTSD was the first indication for BNC210. I just want to be very clear and straightforward. The team, even thinking about BNC210 preclinically, that's what they were gearing towards. So we have a series of preclinical models that point towards not only a broad anxiolytic effect, but an effect on threat avoidance. And threat avoidance is kind of the backbone of PTSD. Okay, so earlier days we had positive data in generalized anxiety disorder and in a panic attack model with robust responses, and we've actually done head-to-head studies with benzodiazepines. But the totality of the data, if you look at PTSD, supports the development of BNC210 in this particular indication. So we have PTSD is reliving your trauma every day, reliving. For your audience, if you think about PTSD, it's like a daily burden of reliving a traumatic experience over and over and over again. You have flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts of this unfortunate event. We call it index trauma, and this index trauma can be domestic violence, it can be a car accident, it can be a death of a family member, it can be a toxic work environment. There's no ending. It can be military engagement. There's no ending to what can trigger PTSD in patients. Okay, so this particular trigger and this reliving of this traumatic experience also causes depression, cognitive issues, avoidance, causes irritability, aggression, trouble concentrating, trouble sleeping. So PTSD has, based on the DSM-5 criteria, 20 different psychiatric symptoms that are captured through this structured interview called the Clinician Assessment of PTSD version 5. So it's a complex disorder with a level of severity that's unparalleled for the patients that are suffering. So with BNC210, we've been able to demonstrate both with clinical and preclinical data over time that we could actually improve all the clusters, all the four symptom clusters of PTSD. One is intrusive thoughts. The other one is mood and cognition. The other one is avoidance. And there's a fourth one, which is a more general, anxiety, irritability, aggression. So there are four clusters, and we have data to support that BNC210 can actually provide symptomatic benefit and reduce the total symptom severity in these patients. So it's not just administering an anxiolytic, a broad spectrum anxiolytic. It's delivering a medication that has the potential to reduce a lot of the symptoms. And what we saw and was surprising, at least to me, some things I was expecting. I was expecting, effects on intrusive thoughts. I was expecting effects on avoidance and, of course, anxiety, yada, yada. But we saw a very good response to depressive symptom severity in the PTSD trial. Supporting the notion that there might be an antidepressant element to the mechanism of action. And it absolutely makes sense, because if you look at the expression of the alpha-7 nicotinic receptors, it's expressed exactly in the areas that control mood in humans.
Gotcha. So there's a potential expansion like roadmap here without committing to anything across a broader range of psychiatric
We
conditions?
absolutely, we are, and I can elaborate on this a little
Okay,
bit.
yeah. I'm never really sure what you're allowed to say.
No, yeah. So it's I'm allowed to talk science as much as we want. So
Okay, lovely.
talking science and talking ideas and talking expansion is something that I welcome. And
I love that. I love that.
I'm all for transparency. Okay. Also, I don't, I believe that science should be democratized at the right time, the right way. There are no big secrets any longer, unless the Alpha 7 is no big secret and where it's involved and where it can be deployed. But coming back to your question about potential future indications, I'm just going to start with a very harsh realization here for your audience that small companies have to focus.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a one of a kind data set in PTSD. This is the only data set with a novel mechanism of action that has shown clinical benefit in a large, late stage, potentially registrational trial. Okay, because Attune is potentially registrational based on our interactions with the FDA. The other programs are psychedelics, okay, a category of their own. They have a role, but we're talking about, a outpatient approach with a novel mechanism of action. So this is what we have is very important to continue developing because, as we said, patients don't have options. It's just a no-brainer for us to continue our work in PTSD. There is a lot of potential and opportunity in anxiety disorders. Okay, and the numbers are staggering. 30, 40 million. I don't know. The numbers are just out of this world. Yeah, yeah. So and we have data in generalized anxiety disorder very much supporting the development of BNC210 in that indication. We have data in panic attacks supporting, but our stronger data set and our largest data set is social anxiety disorder. And we tackled social anxiety disorder because, believe it or not, other than panic attacks, where you measure the number of attacks and severity of attacks, it has some objectivity in the realm of subjectivity. Yeah. So for social anxiety disorder, there is also a task and a development path that is different, and it's different in a methodological way, but it's also different in terms of timelines and costs. So the timelines and the costs for running social anxiety disorder are shorter. And for a small company with kind of specific funds to allocate, we chose social anxiety disorder. I was not with the company when this choice was made, but I completely support the choice that the previous management over at Bionomics made to move into the space of social anxiety disorder instead of going, let's say, after generalized anxiety disorder or panic attacks. So we have an indication that is based on chronic administration, that's PTSD, which is your typical 12-week trial, placebo-controlled, based on an established scale called CAPS-5. And we have another treatment paradigm that is acute, dare I say, a Tylenol for social anxiety disorder, which
maybe.
maybe. I mean, I hope your audience doesn't, misinterpret my optimism here. We're still in phase 3. We're still experimental phase.
Of
but
course.
There's a good parallel. There's nothing out there. And the development path is what I call, short and sweet.
Yeah, certainly.
Cost effective. So that's why we chose social anxiety disorder and PTSD as a company.
Yeah, you go where the data is the clearest, where there's the most unmet need, and hopefully the development complexity is the lowest. There's a triangulation, I'm sure.
Yeah, and huge market. Yeah, as you said, unmet need, huge markets, and no innovation.
Yeah.
for 25 years plus.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been said on the show a few times that it feels like we're in a psychiatry and neuroscience renaissance. I'm curious, like, what do you think is driving this? Why all this action today?
Oh, I've always dreamt about this moment, Brandon. I've been I've been a neuroscientist and neurologist. I've been a neuroscientist more than I've been a neurologist. I've been in neuroscience for 27 years. I've been a neurologist for about 20 plus years. And I've always when I actually was being trained as a neurologist, I always dreamt about us having more opportunity to peek into the brain. Our toolbox is what is driving this renaissance. We have modalities, imaging modalities, biomarkers, clinical trial methodologies, from a psychometric perspective, better scales, better awareness. So over the last 20 years, my job as a neurologist has become a lot better because and a clinical researcher, because I have a better insight on the brain's functions, and a toolbox that I can use to interrogate the brain. So that is the number one reason why we have been able to do more in neurosciences and develop better experimental therapeutics and put them to the test. So that's the number one reason. The unmet need is there, has always been, but 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we were not able to diagnose us correctly, to monitor us correctly, or to apply experimental methodologies to study the brain. Whereas now we can. So, thinking where the future of neuroscience is going, it's the ultimate frontier. And we still have a long way to go in neurology and psychiatry, understanding the brain's function, the circuits, the complex neurotransmitter systems. But we're making strides, and whether there is a future where we can look at machine-human interfaces, and whether we can think about the unimaginable in neurosciences and restoring neuronal function in different conditions altogether is going to be achievable or not. I think the jury's out, but we're in a very, very good trajectory with the work that is being conducted today.
Certainly.
I cannot help but being optimistic about neurosciences.
Certainly. It seems like every week on this show, I have another conversation about better understanding how the brain works, how to image the brain, the MOAs, precision, biomarkers, all these kinds of things, new techniques.
I haven't even touched on precision. I have not touched like precision. We can perhaps have a separate standalone conversation on precision and how precision can really change the trajectory of drug development. This is an area, I think, especially precision psychiatry, that we definitely need to spend more time looking into.
Yeah.
Precision neurology has, I think, surpassed precision psychiatry. The genetics of some of the neurological conditions have been more straightforward compared to the genetics for psychiatric conditions, and that have made the neurology space take a small step forward in the precision medicine paradigm for treating conditions, whereas in psychiatry we're still somewhat inventing the path forward. So I'm looking forward to a future where there's definitely more precision psychiatry, because no patient is the same.
Yeah.
I'm not a lumper. I'm a definite splitter when it comes to the pathophysiology of diseases.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure this warrants a separate conversation entirely, because I know in your background you spent a lot of time with the genetics of Parkinson's, which I'd love to have a conversation around as well. But sadly, we don't have the time for today. Where I'd like to close here is maybe to bookend things. I had Ananta Shekhar over at UPMC on the show, and he said that neurology and psychiatry are converging, and you happen to have a dual background here. I'm curious, what do you make of that?
Well, I come from a family of physicians and scientists. So my father was involved. He was a trained neurologist and psychiatrist. So back in the day in Europe, the concept was united and unified. It became separate over a period of, I think, 20 or 30 or 40 years, where the concepts of biological psychiatry and other psychiatry approaches were separated. And I would say for the last 15, 20 years, everyone is acknowledging the biological basis of psychiatric diseases. So this artificial bifurcation happened simply because there were two schools. One that was a psychoanalytical school that believed that everything can be solved through psychoanalysis and behavioral interventions, and medications and treatments were, belonged to another camp. So psychiatry was bifurcated at some point. And I strongly believe that everything is necessary, but there is no doubt that there is a strong biological basis for psychiatry. The psychiatric diseases are like any other disease of the central nervous system. And with this realization, there has been a reconvergence of these indications. And as professionals, I'm a neurologist, but I found myself fascinated by psychiatric issues that the neurological patients faced. And vice versa, I have a lot of great psychiatry colleagues that are interested and have devoted their lives in treating the neuropsychiatric features of neurodegenerative diseases. So it's one organ, very complicated, that forms the foundation for both psychiatric conditions and neurological conditions. And these divisions are somewhat artificial for a good reason. But I think the convergence is real. And I think neurology and psychiatry, and dare I say part of ophthalmology.
Okay. Expanding it. I like it.
Part of ophthalmology, the principles are very similar. And, that's why you see some neuroscientists working in ophthalmology, psychiatry, and neurology interchangeably. I definitely have had the privilege of doing so, but the future is conditions of the brain.
Yeah. Well, certainly with some of these additional tools that you described, kind of underpinning the Renaissance, I think the convergence is all the more compelling. The more we understand, the more we can bring these schools together.
Absolutely, Brandon.
Well, Spyros, thank you so much for taking the time. You've been so generous with your insights and your storytelling here. Really appreciate you joining me on the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation and looking forward to joining you on another episode of your podcast.
Yeah. For the audience, wait for part 2.
Bye now. Thank you.
Cheers.